Hi, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. Today we have as a guest Charles Sansbury, who is the CEO since August of 23, so a year now. We get to talk about that, the CEO of Cloudera. So let me just pull you to the front with us, and thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. So maybe we could start, you could just talk a little bit about Cloudera and its offerings, and then we'll talk into sort of what it's been like to be the CEO there for the first year.
Sure. Well, Cloudera has a pretty long history. The company basically founded the big data and analytics market about 10 years ago. So received more than $1 billion of funding, a lot of that led by some of the largest hardware providers, and went to every large company in the world and provided very complex, very powerful analytics for their most challenging computing analytics jobs. And so the company then grew pretty dramatically, probably one of the fastest growing software companies ever. It went public, merged with its rival that was providing similar technology. So Cloudera came together with another public company called Hortonworks in about late 2021 or thereabouts. And the company was then taken private by two of the world's largest private equity investors at the end of 2022. So been private for a little more than 2 years and have been kind of pursuing the company's opportunity now as a private company. In terms of when taken private, the transaction was roughly a $5 billion take private transaction. Company had roughly $900+ million of revenue. So big global software company serving the world's largest consumers and helping them with their most challenging and most complex data and analytics problems. And then you may have heard about this thing called AI, which kind of came out of nowhere, I guess, about a year and a half ago. But we had been powering companies' machine learning projects for several years. And so increasingly our business has been pulled more toward helping our customers power their AI initiatives because AI at its core is very robust analytics and access to high-speed compute. And we enable those things.
Terrific. So we'll pull that thread in a bit because it's 2024 and we must. But just a question about the take private.
Yes.
So I interviewed a CEO a couple of months ago and said, who'd just been taken private by another big PE firm. And I said, so what's the plan? And he said, I am the plan. So I would love to know what are you hoping to get out of the take private beyond having, of course, an amazing CEO. Yeah.
Boy, I don't know if that means kind of I am the plan. I can tell you the financial sponsors typically have a thesis, and their thesis at Cloudera was company, but going through a couple of transitions, a transition of bringing two companies together and two products together into one integrated platform. And that's typically a lot of work and ended up taking about a year and a half or 2 years. And then two, an industry that was in transition to be more cloud focused, to enable multiple technology platforms. And all of those things took additional investment, and not in the kind of the even step way that the markets would like to see. So because of that, a lot of the work, when you're doing work like that, a lot of that work is best done in the relative obscurity of being a private company. And it's very hard to manage through transition as a public company, because so much of the change you're making becomes visible, and there's in many cases a bias creeps into how people evaluate your actions. I was at a public company for a long time, had to make a lot of change at that company, and that's a very difficult dive to execute. It's got a very high degree of difficulty, and then you kind of add a spin in halfway down, it makes it even harder. So the thesis was the company had this great opportunity, made better by the emergence of deep analytics and increasingly AI, but had to do a bunch of work around investment to optimize that opportunity, had to finish bringing together the two merged companies, and doing all of those things simultaneously provided kind of a path to go private and do that as a private company.
Great. Yeah. Without the short-term pressures of quarterly earnings reports and all of that, right? So you could have sort of a longer-term focus, if not a long-term focus, but a longer-term focus.
Yes, a longer term. I say our investors still want a return on their investment. They have a much longer term focus, as opposed to, I joke frequently about the tyranny of the 26-year-old analyst with the spreadsheet. is not a tyranny under which I want to live.
There you go. That's well said. So we were talking earlier about Cloudera being a key player in sort of data cloud, and how has that evolved over the past few years, particularly I would imagine with this merger/acquisition of Hortonworks. Sort of what's the word I want to say? Yeah, what are the data management challenges that you're
Yep.
able to solve today?
Yep. Well, I say a couple of things have happened. First of all, data and analytics grew up in people's data centers. You had massive commitments of computing to do complex analytics for things like fraud detection within a large financial services institution, or network vulnerability and reliability for various security applications. And then increasingly the cloud became relevant. People starting to
Mm,
do and move certain workloads, certain processing jobs to the cloud. And so we had this big shift to being very cloud focused, and all of the companies began enabling their software to work for the cloud. What we have done is, I say, we focus on the world's largest companies. What
mhm,
we're seeing with those companies is actually a repatriation, they call it, or a migration back of some workloads from cloud-based processing infrastructure to on-premises or private cloud. But really,
mm,
the companies that we work for, there was a recent survey from one of the large investment banks that said CIOs of 100 large companies surveyed, of those, 4 out of 5 plan to repatriate workloads from the cloud. What that really means is, while the cloud is still growing very dramatically in the small, medium, and maybe even the medium large markets, the largest companies in the world have the scale to basically own some infrastructure and have cloud-based capabilities. And then what they want to do is they want to match the workload to the
mhm,
appropriate computing platform. So if it's a workload that runs, it's a promotion, it's going to be short-lived in nature, or it's something that has very intermittent processing requirements, that's more appropriate for cloud-based infrastructure. Something that runs all day, every day in the background, analyzing the core business process, that's likely a workload that runs on your own hardware, runs all the time. And so the world's largest companies, which is our market, are moving to what's being called a hybrid infrastructure, where they
yeah.
use both on-premises, private cloud, and public cloud infrastructure. And what got me so excited about Cloudera was really we were the only company that enables that hybrid capability across on-prem, private cloud, and public cloud. And so we've become increasingly important and strategic to our customers as they tackle this next phase of their data and analytics journey. So that is, I think, how we've seen the market evolving for large customers and how they think about the world. And it just happens to have been very, very aligned with how we were building our product strategy.
It's interesting, this shift back to hybrid. I've heard other when I say shift back to, because most people never got fully cloud, but maybe a
Right.
recognition that hybrid is the way to go. And just to make sure I understood, what large companies are tending to keep um, in-house or on-prem tends to be things that are used all day, every day,
Mm-hmm.
and it is other systems and processes that tend to end up in the cloud.
Well, I think things that are more temporal in nature. If it's an automobile company running a September to Remember promotion, and they
Yep.
have to tie together the analytics and the inventory
Yep.
and things of that nature, that's more likely to go on cloud-based infrastructure. If it's something that only has to run a big, huge process very intermittently, and you need that
Mhm.
scaling up and scaling down capacity of cloud-based infrastructure, that's probably cloud-based. And a lot of the newer workloads are probably moving to the cloud as well. But the core blocking and tackling of analytics that we run to look
Mhm.
at patterns in manufacturing data, to look at patterns in clinical research and trials data, which are really massive data sets undergoing a whole bunch of
Mhm.
rigorous analysis. Those are, in saying, or if they had moved to cloud-based infrastructure, they're moving back to on-prem for purposes of security, very important, manageability, and also in some cases cost. Those types of workloads can be very, very pricey to run in what is a more expensive computing platform, which is the cloud-based infrastructure. And then internationally, there are a number of countries that have decided that for a lot of both their kind of sovereign companies and for their sovereign data, they don't want to make it accessible via the cloud. So we're seeing
Sure.
also because we serve a lot of public sector entities. We're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of public sector entities have a real focus on the security aspects and the manageability aspects of private cloud or on-premises capabilities versus putting data out to the public cloud and kind of, from their perspective, losing control over it.
Yeah.
So, and I do want to point out these are big company problems. I
Mhm.
think it's still the case that small and medium-sized companies are moving very quickly to the cloud, but these are companies that don't have 50-year histories of doing acquisitions and all this technology infrastructure that's come together over
Right.
time. We talk about these companies as having an accidental infrastructure that was the
Mhm.
product of decades of decisions, and that's not kind of a neat set of boxes on paper. And so making changes to that takes time and requires a lot of understanding of those accidental architectures. And that's why I think we see so many of our largest institutions optimizing what they have and then making it run with the new stuff, whatever the new
Mhm.
stuff is, but
Yep.
leveraging that kind of portfolio of technologies. And we are quite literally the only provider that provides them with this hybrid management and control capability across multiple computing platforms, which means we are strategic to all of these companies as they think about data and analytics. And that's a neat place to be in, but it's also an obligation to us because we have to continue to evolve our technology. So as I say, we've spent
Of course.
more than $1 billion in R&D in the last couple of years to continue to move and evolve the product set.
That's an astonishing number. I just want to call it out. $1 billion in the last couple of years on R&D. So would you say that for large institutions anyway, that this management of hybrid is like the biggest data management challenge today, or are there others?
I think that data management is one of the biggest challenges that businesses have because they have tons and tons of data, but in different repositories in different places. And with the advent of accelerated compute and then the application of AI, they're all being challenged to figure out how to use that data to make better business decisions. We have a customer that's a pharmaceutical research company. They've got roughly 30 years of clinical trials data, research reports spread across multiple geographies and multiple languages. And what they were able to do is to lay a data mesh on top of that to
Mhm.
go and allow them to search and analyze all that data completely. And they were able to identify certain ties between certain genes and certain compounds that would interact on those genes. And it allowed them basically to accelerate the drug discovery process by knowing that this specific compound impacted this specific gene. And because of that, that's where we should start looking for ways to build a new medicine around these ties. And they estimate it saved them hundreds of millions of dollars in drug discovery. But that wouldn't have been possible without this data infrastructure that I talked about that tied together different studies in different languages written decades apart. So that's a pretty fascinating
Mm.
application. But I think their bigger challenge is AI is so in the news right now, and every board of directors and every management team is asking their data science teams, give us some quick wins. And really, the quick wins are not as exciting as maybe the headlines you see. But I will tell you one, I think we're in the very early innings of how AI is going to help run businesses better. We're doing things like creating content or improving the quality of customer service or making product offerings based on observed behavior. And those are the early innings. We don't yet know what the killer apps will be of AI.
Mm.
But from a Cloudera perspective, we're not trying to do that. We provide kind of the infrastructure that allows you to manage and control and make your data available for these advanced processing tools, these large language models. So we liken ourselves to selling more of the shovels and the pickaxes to the miners. That's kind of the business that we find ourselves in.
Right. So let's talk about data and data privacy and security, which you brought up a few minutes ago, is
Mhm.
certainly an issue and a reason that people would choose to keep some on-prem. But even in the cloud, of course, that's a big concern for all companies. How does Cloudera address that as an issue?
So we give people the tools and basically the frameworks to manage information privacy, to manage information security. So from our perspective, we enable customers to set up structures, data centers, public clouds, private clouds with that kind of walled garden mentality.
Mhm.
And then obviously as a as a software provider, we do a lot around security and accessibility that's important. And the one thing I will tell you is I talk about data and analytics being a huge priority of customers. Probably the only thing that is of higher priority to them right now is cybersecurity, because that's on the mind
Mm,
of
right.
every corporate executive. So I say we're a very high priority. We are not a cybersecurity provider. That is probably the highest priority given all of the recent, I say, bumps in the road that we have had as an industry as it relates to security and accessibility.
Yeah. And more to come. I've
Yeah,
talked to a couple of security CEOs, and we want to. I want to believe that the good guys are going to win in the end, but there's quite a battle being pitched in the moment, and I think it's just early days, as you say.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So, if I could turn for a minute to your leadership, you've been now at Cloudera for just at a year.
Mhm.
What has that first year been like from a leadership standpoint?
I guess it's my third or fourth time kind of stepping into a new role, and I like to think I learned things from each early inning. In this case, there's a desire always to make change, and people are always a big fan of change, except when it happens to them. So what I've tried to do is be very transparent about what our goals are, what our priorities are, and where we're going. I've tried to offer clear prioritization, and that means things that we're going to do, but also things that we're not going to do. So we went through it's always a very difficult prioritization exercise around our product roadmaps and our development priorities. And then I try to create situations where we tie together and align corporate goals with business unit goals, so that
Mhm.
there's alignment both in terms of goals as well as incentives. And I find that if you can be very transparent about what you're doing and why, and then have clear prioritization and alignment, that allows people to have a clear path of what we're doing and why. And then what that means from my perspectives, it means I go all around the world and say the same things again, because that it's that old telephone game of, if you have someone tell someone, by the time you get four down, they're telling a different story. Showing up in person and reiterating the priorities and saying them again and being kind of ruthlessly monotonous is very important. And then I guess one of the things that I try to talk about is from a business perspective, and I have a slide like this in every presentation I do to the company. First and foremost, it's around customers. So
Mhm.
our customers matter, and our obligation is to deliver quality products, quality support, and innovation to help them run their businesses. So customers matter. Second thing, people matter. And so from a people perspective, meaningful career opportunities, meaningful growth opportunities, being supportive, being a good place to work that is fair and inclusive and a fun place to work. So people matter. And then the third thing is results matter. I say we also want to make sure that we have goals and we're achieving those goals. But I find that if you do a good job from a customers matter perspective and a people's matter perspective, that makes the results piece kind of fall into place behind those two.
Yeah. Especially with your longer term perspective, right? I think
Yeah.
you can make things happen for a short period of time, but for a company that's going to thrive in the longer term, really important. You said a couple of things there. I want to underscore. One is you said you want to relentlessly repeat the message,
Yes.
and it's so important. My psychologist husband says we have to say things three times for the average mind to pick them up, and not that any of your employees would be average, but just repeating the message so that people have it. And then you said in the why, right, so they understand the intent behind what they're doing,
Hmm.
because people are making 10,000 decisions every day, right? And if they don't understand the intent or the why, it's just, oh, Charles said to do this, they're not going to make those decisions so well. So I think those are two things I would applaud. I hope you said you learned from early in your career. I hope you learned those early in your career, because they're great lessons to
I
carry
say,
forward.
unfortunately, I probably learned as many things by doing things wrong as doing things right. And I learned probably also a lot of patience in terms of coming into a new job, that you can only have change at a certain pace. And so You probably do things a little bit slower than you would want to, because to people who aren't the new person, the pace of change seems very fast. And it's very hard, I find, to find that equilibrium of pushing the pace and having that sense of urgency to make change, but recognizing that you need to bring everyone else along at a pace that they're, slightly uncomfortable with, but not massively uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so big, right? Just getting people around that inflection point on the change curve where they're into exploration and not in resistance, which maybe they aren't from the sort of the thinking part of their brain, but as you say, none of us like change when we have it. We just have to work our way through the change curve as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Yeah, that's great. So another question for you around leadership. I think a thread that I have found in all of these interviews I've done with C-suite has to do with sort of a lot of ambiguity, right? The higher you are in a senior leadership role from a hierarchy standpoint, the more ambiguity there is. Because there's just less knowns. And so we have to develop a way to be curious about that, but still have a bias for action, because we do, as you say, still need to get results. So how do you deal with the inevitable ambiguity that is part of your role as a CEO?
It's as though we prepared for this question, but we didn't. I mean, so it's something I talk a lot about. And as people get more senior, they're confronted with decisions that are harder and harder to make. And this started with, there was a woman I worked with years ago, and we were promoting her to a bigger job. And the point that I made was, in your prior jobs, you've had decisions where you could look at them and you kind of knew 70-30 or 60-40 what the answer was. And as you get more senior, you get a lot of 51-49s. 51% this, 49% that. And I think what's important there is to realize that, and to realize when you get to one of those 51-49s, you have to make a decision. And I say this specifically, at that point, it's not really about making the right decision, because at 51 and 49, both can be successful. It's making the decision right, which means articulating why you're doing what you're doing, telling the team why, verbally addressing that. I know that some people could have seen this going one way versus another, but here's what we're going to go do. And if we all don't get aligned behind supporting this decision, whether we chose the 51 or the 49, the decision will not be successful. And if we do get behind either the 51 or the 49, then that decision will be successful. So my point is, early on in your career, it's easy to make the right decision because they're very visible, the choices you have. But as you get more senior, things that rise to you become kind of coin flips. So it's about getting buy-in in the decision-making process, and making the decision right is how I talk about it, because it's one of those things that's very uncomfortable when you think about it, that there's never a perfect or right decision that comes to, someone's desk. There are trade-offs, and you have to get comfortable with that, and you have to just make your decision and then, quote, make the decision right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love the way that you said it. And this will be a clip that gets replayed and replayed, because it's exactly the point that people have to be comfortable with. There's not one right decision. There are multiple. And so when you say, I don't understand why he made that decision, it wasn't a coin flip, but it wasn't as clear as a 60-40 or 70-30. So I love that you articulate that so well.
Yep.
So my last question, Charles, is the tagline for my consulting business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be, is in that upper right-hand quadrant.
Yep.
Was there a moment in your career when you knew that you were moving up and to the right, that you would be successful as a leader?
Boy, I don't think there was, in the sense of, I mean, I have those things more looking back, like, wow, collectively we did a pretty good job there, and made some good decisions in some difficult circumstances. But I've never been that, forward looking. I want to go get the next job, and probably because of that, I've probably been in jobs longer than maybe people who were focused on climbing the ladder as quickly as possible. I've worked for 3 software companies over time before this one. One I worked for about 6 years, one for 9 years, the other for 6 years. That is an eternity by software standards. But I've always told folks who kind of want to progress so quickly, and these kids, I'm going to use the younger generation, and I know exactly how old I sound when I say that. But there's the desire to, I'd like a promotion after 8 months of good work. And
Hmm.
my point to people has been, if you find something and do a good job at it, it will get noticed, and that'll help you progress. But there's so much focus right now on title and on moving on for the sake of moving on. I don't know that people are focused on the right things, which are developing skill sets at a certain level and then getting prepared for a place where you can learn the next level of management skill sets because you built a foundation in that first level. I worry that maybe there's so much impatience and people don't value the benefits of having a foundation of experience before being promoted. And we all have stories of people who were promoted too quickly and didn't have kind of the skill sets to do that. So, I guess I was never a person that focused on, I need to get to this next level. But looking back, I can say there's some certain, episodes in the career where, the team that I was working with, we pulled together and did some interesting things in terms of transforming a company or opening up a new set of market opportunities. And when you look back, obviously you feel great, great pride in those things. But probably I do more of that introspection looking back than I do looking forward.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for sharing those lessons with us. I wish you and your team all the best moving forward. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for taking the time. I enjoyed it.